The data center was never truly dark. It only changed colors, shifting from the warm gold of human life to a sterile white that flattened everything it touched. Endless rows of servers stood like disciplined soldiers, breathing softly in mechanical rhythm. The sound was constant, steady, almost alive, an artificial heartbeat that never slept. Daniel Foster swiped his badge at the entrance. Beep. The heavy door released a sigh of compressed air and slid open. Cold hit his face instantly. He stepped inside, carrying the quiet fatigue of a man who had learned to measure his days in hours worked, not hours rested. Beneath him walked Lily, her steps shorter, careful. She wore a faded blue jacket, the cuffs slightly frayed from too many washes. A small bunny-shaped backpack hung from her shoulders, second-hand, but scrubbed clean enough that the fabric smelled faintly of detergent and hope. "Do you remember the rules?" Daniel asked, lowering himself so his eyes met hers. Lily nodded seriously. "Sit still. Don't run. Don't touch anything. And if someone asks why you're here," Daniel prompted, "I'm waiting for my dad," she said. Then, after a pause, added softly, "I won't bother anyone." Something tightened in Daniel's chest. He brushed a hand over her hair, but only briefly. He'd learned not to linger. Love, when you're poor and alone, had to be efficient. The security desk sat just inside the main entrance. A low wooden counter, flickering monitors, a chair that squeaked when turned too quickly. Carl, the night guard, glanced up and smiled, a tired smile that carried no judgment. "Evening, Daniel," Carl said. "You brought your shadow again?" Daniel exhaled a small laugh. "School let out early, babysitter canceled last minute." Carl nodded. Life explained itself without further detail. "She can sit here," Carl said. "Just keep her out of the server halls. The patrol guys don't like surprises." "I know," Daniel replied quickly. "Just a few hours." Lily climbed onto the chair in the corner, pulled a worn picture book from her backpack, and opened it with great care, as if even the sound of turning a page might disturb the building. Daniel watched her for a second too long. A child shouldn't be this good at being quiet. He turned away and headed deeper into the facility. The air smelled of metal and cold circulation. His arms still ached from hauling equipment earlier that day, but the night shift here paid steadily. Enough for rent. Enough for school lunches. Enough to keep the lights on. Enough was a cruel word. It never meant more. He checked the electrical panel. The day crew had left a note taped to the side. Temperature fluctuations in Rack B. Potential overheating risk. Daniel sighed. It was going to be a long night. Near 11, hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor. Not the measured pace of technicians, but the sharp rhythm of urgency. "Daniel," the operations manager called out, face tight. "Listen, executive alert. She's coming in." Daniel frowned. "Who?" "The CEO, Evelyn Cross. Tonight." For a moment, Daniel thought he'd misheard. "Tonight?" "IPO is tomorrow. Any data instability is unacceptable. She wants eyes on everything." Daniel swallowed. Everyone knew Evelyn Cross. In the company, her name was spoken the way people spoke of storms, quietly, with respect, and a little fear. Meetings with her felt less like conversations and more like examinations. Daniel's mind jumped instantly, not to the servers, but to the front desk, to Lily. He closed the panel and moved fast toward the entrance. Carl was watching the security feed, jaw set. "Daniel," he said under his breath, "executive security just notified us. Full sweep tonight." Daniel looked at Lily, her legs dangling as she read, unaware of words like policy and violation, words that could dismantle a fragile life. "Lily," Daniel said gently, crouching. "Come here." She hurried over, careful not to make noise. "There will be more people tonight," Daniel said. "Sit close to Carl. If anyone asks, you're waiting for me, and don't be scared." Lily studied his face with unsettling calm. "I'm not scared," she said. "I just don't want you to be sad." Daniel felt the sting behind his eyes. He wanted to say, "I'm fine," but lies, even gentle ones, had weight. He hugged her quickly, a short embrace. Fire held two long burns. The glass doors slid open. Cold air rushed in as a small group entered. Two security officers, an assistant holding a tablet, and at the center of them all, a woman in a long black coat. Evelyn Cross moved with purpose. Her heels struck the floor like punctuation marks. She did not scan the room the way visitors did. She assessed it the way surgeons assessed operating rooms. Her gaze passed over Carl, then paused, on Lily. It was only a second, but in that second, Daniel felt the air compress. A child inside a critical infrastructure facility was not a variable, it was a breach. Daniel straightened instinctively. Evelyn took a step forward. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. "Who is that?" Daniel looked at Lily, then at the woman whose signature could erase his name from payroll records with a flick of the wrist. He knew, in that moment, that what he said next would not only decide his job, but what his daughter would learn about dignity. He inhaled slowly and spoke. Evelyn Cross had not been late in over a decade. Not to a meeting, not to a decision, not to herself. Her calendar ruled her life with mechanical precision, blocks of time arranged like chess pieces, every move calculated, every pause intentional. Even tonight, the night before the company's public offering, she had not planned to leave her office. But plans were luxuries. Systems were obligations. The car ride to the data center passed in silence. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the city into pale lines of light. Evelyn sat in the back seat, reviewing metrics on her tablet, storage redundancy, thermal thresholds, failover response times, the language of certainty. Numbers did not hesitate. Numbers did not disappoint. "Estimated arrival in 3 minutes," her assistant said softly. Evelyn nodded without looking up. When the car stopped, she stepped out before anyone opened the door for her. Cold air bit at her face. The building rose in front of her, windowless, utilitarian, unremarkable, the kind of place that held the world together without ever being seen. Inside, the doors slid open. She entered with her security detail, already scanning, already correcting. Her presence altered the temperature of the room, not physically, but socially. Conversations paused, shoulders straightened. People adjusted themselves as if being watched by a mirror that showed only flaws. She noticed everything. A loose cable near the wall, a monitor flickering half a second too long, a guard sitting straighter than necessary. And then, something out of place, a child. The girl stood near the security desk, small hands folded around a book. Her jacket was worn, her backpack faded. She did not move when Evelyn entered. She did not stare. She simply existed, quietly, where policy said she should not. Evelyn stopped walking. "Who is that?" she asked. The question was not sharp. It did not need to be. It cut anyway. The man standing a few steps away, maintenance uniform, tired eyes, shifted his weight. He looked at the child first, then at Evelyn. "I'm Daniel Foster," he said. "She's my daughter, Lily." Evelyn studied him the way she studied risk assessments. Calm, still, no immediate threat, but irregular. "This facility is restricted," she said. "Children are not permitted on site." "I know," Daniel replied. He did not apologize. He did not argue. "I didn't have another option tonight." Evelyn's assistant took a step forward, already preparing a response. Evelyn raised a hand slightly. The assistant stopped. "Why is she here?" Evelyn asked. Daniel answered honestly. "Her school closed early. My childcare fell through. I work nights." Simple facts, no embellishment, no plea. Evelyn looked again at the girl. Lily had lifted her eyes now, not to Evelyn, but to her father, watching him, learning. A familiar tightening stirred in Evelyn's chest. She dismissed it immediately. Feelings were distractions. Patterns were what mattered. "There are regulations," Evelyn said. "This building houses critical infrastructure." "I understand," Daniel said. "If you want me to leave, I will." The words landed heavier than expected. Leave. Not argue, not negotiate. Leave. Evelyn frowned slightly. "And the issue in Rack B?" Daniel met her gaze steadily. "If I leave, it won't get fixed tonight." The operations manager shifted nervously nearby. Evelyn could feel the tension spreading, people unsure whether to breathe. She turned to him. "How long to stabilize the system?" 2 hours, Daniel said. "Maybe less." Evelyn considered the variables: risk of failure, risk of delay, risk of precedent. Her eyes returned to Lily. The child had resumed reading, as if the conversation were happening behind glass. The book's spine was cracked, its pages soft with use. "What are you reading?" Evelyn asked, surprising herself. Lily hesitated, looked at her father. "It's okay," Daniel said quietly. "A book about a lighthouse," Lily answered. "It helps ships not crash." Something cold loosened inside Evelyn. A lighthouse. She remembered a different book. Same story, same illustrations. A smaller version of herself sitting cross-legged on a carpet, her son beside her, his head heavy against her arm. She hadn't thought of that in years. Evelyn straightened. "You may finish your task," she said to Daniel. "Your daughter will remain at the security desk. She is not to move from that area." Daniel nodded once. "Thank you." No gratitude, no relief, just acknowledgement. Evelyn turned away before the feeling could deepen. She walked toward the server halls, her heels echoing against the floor. The system logs appeared on her tablet again, but the numbers felt less solid than before. As Daniel returned to work, he glanced back once. Lily gave him a small thumbs up. He smiled faintly and disappeared into the corridor. Evelyn stood before the glass wall overlooking the servers. The machines hummed obediently. Order restored. Almost. Yet her attention drifted, back to the girl, back to the quiet man who had chosen leaving over pleading. She had known many men who would have begged. That, more than the violation, unsettled her. For the first time that night, Evelyn Cross did not sign the next document waiting on her screen. She closed the tablet and stood there, listening to the machines breathe. Still, rules were written to make people invisible. Evelyn Cross had learned that early in her career, long before she learned how to bend them. A rule did not see a face. It did not hear a voice. It did not notice small hands folded carefully in a lap. Rules were clean that way, efficient, untroubled by consequence, which was why they were dangerous. Daniel Foster worked through the first hour without incident. The temperature in Rack B stabilized slowly, the numbers easing back into acceptable ranges. He moved with practiced economy, every step measured, every motion familiar. His body remembered labor the way other bodies remembered music. Still, his thoughts kept drifting forward, to the entrance desk, to Lily. Each time he passed a reflective surface, he caught a glimpse of himself, shoulders slightly hunched, jaw set, eyes alert, the posture of a man prepared to be told no. At the security desk, Lily sat perfectly still. Carl had turned his chair sideways so he could watch both the monitors and the child. He slid a cup of water toward her, quietly, like a secret. "You doing okay, kiddo?" he asked. Lily nodded. "I'm being extra quiet." "I can see that," Carl said. "You're doing great." She smiled, small, proud, and returned to her book. The lighthouse stood tall on the page, its beam cutting through dark water. Lily traced the picture with her finger, slow and careful, as if the light might follow her touch. Footsteps approached, not hurried this time, measured, official. Two members of executive security appeared at the edge of the desk area. Their suits were darker than the night shift uniforms, their earpieces discreet but unmistakable. Carl stiffened slightly. "Evening, gentlemen." One of the officers glanced at the monitors, then at Lily. "Who's the child?" he asked. Carl hesitated, just long enough to be honest. "That's Daniel Foster's daughter. He's maintenance. She's waiting here." The officer frowned. "Children aren't authorized in this facility." "I know," Carl said. "The CEO was informed." The officer exchanged a look with his partner. "Doesn't matter. Policy is policy." Lily looked up. Her fingers tightened around the book. "Is my dad in trouble?" she asked quietly. The officer glanced down, uncomfortable. "No, sweetheart, but you can't be here." Carl leaned forward. "Sir, the system issue—" "We'll handle it," the officer cut in. "The child needs to leave the premises." Lily stood, sliding off the chair carefully, as if sudden movements might worsen the situation. "I can wait outside," she offered. "I won't move." Carl felt something twist in his chest. "It's cold out there," he said gently. "I have my jacket," Lily replied. She reached for her backpack. At that moment, Daniel emerged from the corridor. He took in the scene instantly. The officers, Lily standing too straight, Carl's helpless expression. "What's going on?" Daniel asked. The officer turned. "Your daughter can't be here. You'll need to escort her out." Daniel felt the familiar rush of heat behind his eyes, not anger, something quieter. He knelt in front of Lily. "Hey," he said softly, "did you do something wrong?" Lily shook her head quickly. "No, I was quiet." "I know you were." Daniel smiled, but it didn't quite hold. "You did everything right." He stood and faced the officers. "I understand the rule," Daniel said, "but I'm in the middle of a stabilization. If I leave now—" "Then you leave," the officer said. "We'll log it." Daniel nodded once. "I'll finish securing the system," he said. "Then I'll take her home." The officer shook his head. "Now." Daniel's jaw tightened, not in defiance, but in calculation. He glanced back toward the server hall. The numbers were better, but not safe. Leaving now would mean a risk. Staying would mean breaking a rule. Lily tugged his sleeve. "It's okay, Dad," she whispered. "We can go." The words hurt more than any reprimand. Daniel straightened. "If my daughter leaves," he said evenly, "I leave with her." Silence settled over the desk. Carl stopped breathing. The officer blinked. "Are you refusing a direct instruction?" "I'm making a choice," Daniel replied. A beat passed, then another. One officer touched his earpiece. "Ma'am," he said quietly, eyes lifting toward the glass wall down the corridor, "we have a situation at the security desk." Evelyn Cross appeared moments later. She took in the tableau in a single glance. The officers, the man, the child holding a book like a shield. "What's happening?" she asked. The officer spoke quickly. "Unauthorized minor on site. We're enforcing removal." Evelyn's gaze moved to Daniel. "Is that accurate?" "Yes," Daniel said. "And if she goes, I go." Evelyn studied him, really studied him this time, not as an irregularity, but as a person. "You're prepared to abandon a critical task," she said, "on the eve of an IPO. I'm prepared to leave a building," Daniel corrected. "Not my responsibilities." Lily looked up at Evelyn then. "I didn't mean to break anything," she said. "I was just waiting." Something shifted, not dramatically, not visibly, but Evelyn felt it. She remembered another waiting room, another child, another night when rules had been followed perfectly, and something essential had still been lost. She exhaled slowly. "Stand down," Evelyn said to the officers. They hesitated. "I'll take responsibility," she added. The officers stepped back. Daniel felt his knees weaken, just slightly. Lily relaxed her grip on the book. Evelyn looked at the child. "You may stay here," she said, "but only here." Lily nodded solemnly. "I won't move." Daniel met Evelyn's eyes. "Thank you." Evelyn inclined her head once. "Finish your work." As she turned away, the rulebook in her mind felt thinner, less certain. Behind her, the servers hummed on. And at the security desk, Lily sat back down, opening her book to the page with the light. Because. The data center returned to its rhythm, but the rhythm felt altered, like a clock that had been opened and closed again, never quite ticking the same way. Daniel went back to Rack B. He checked the temperature curves, recalibrated airflow, tightened a loose panel. His hands moved with the certainty of habit, yet his thoughts lagged behind, replaying the moment at the security desk. He did not allow himself relief. Relief was a luxury that tempted carelessness. Across the building, Evelyn Cross stood behind the glass wall, watching the numbers settle. Green indicators replaced yellow, risk narrowed, order returned. Still, she did not move. Her assistant hovered nearby, tablet ready. "We can resume the checklist," the assistant said. "In a moment," Evelyn replied. She turned her attention, not to the servers, but to the desk by the entrance. The child sat exactly where she had been told, feet not touching the floor, book open on her lap. The guard beside her had angled his chair protectively, as if proximity alone could serve as permission. Evelyn frowned, not in irritation, but in concentration. Rules existed to remove ambiguity, yet ambiguity had entered anyway. She left the server hall and walked back toward the desk, alone this time. Daniel noticed her approach before she spoke. He closed the panel and wiped his hands on a cloth, straightening instinctively. Not submissive, simply ready. "Mr. Foster," Evelyn said. "Yes," Daniel replied. "I want to understand something," she said. "When you said you would leave with your daughter, did you expect me to change the rule?" "No," Daniel said. The answer came too quickly to be rehearsed. Evelyn waited. "I expected to leave," he added. "I just wanted you to know why." Evelyn absorbed this. Most people would have asked for an exception. Daniel shook his head. "Exceptions make people small. I didn't want her to learn that." Evelyn glanced at Lily. The girl was tracing the lighthouse beam on the page again, slow and precise, as if repetition itself were a promise. "And what did you want her to learn?" Evelyn asked. Daniel hesitated. He was careful with words when Lily was near. "That she's not something I hide," he said. "And that staying matters more than arguing." Evelyn felt a quiet pressure behind her ribs. Not pain, recognition. She turned to Lily. "Do you like lighthouses?" Lily looked up, surprised to be addressed directly. She nodded. "They don't move," she said, "but they help." Evelyn held the child's gaze for a beat longer than necessary. Then she straightened. "You may continue your work, Mr. Foster." Daniel inclined his head. "Thank you." Evelyn paused. That wasn't gratitude, she said, precise as ever. That was acknowledgement. Daniel accepted the correction without comment. As Evelyn walked away, she noticed something else. Something small, easily missed. Lily's shoe had come untied. The lace trailed dangerously close to the chair leg. Evelyn stopped. She looked back. The guard hadn't noticed. Daniel was already turning toward the server hall. Without ceremony, Evelyn crouched and tied the lace herself. Lily froze, startled. "There," Evelyn said softly. "That's safer." "Thank you," Lily whispered. Evelyn stood quickly, as if embarrassed by the gesture. She walked away without looking back. Behind the glass, she resumed her position, but she did not open her tablet. She watched Daniel finish his task with steady patience. She watched Lily wait without complaint. At midnight, the system stabilized fully. Daniel logged the fix and shut down the tools. He returned to the desk. "All set," he said to Carl. Carl smiled, relief heavy in his eyes. "Good work." Daniel knelt to Lily's height. "Ready to go home?" Lily hesitated. She looked at the building, then back at her father. "Are you going to lose your job?" Daniel considered the question. "No," he said. "And even if I did, this was still the right thing." Lily nodded, absorbing this with the seriousness she brought to all lessons. They gathered their things. Daniel slung the backpack over his shoulder, careful not to rush. Evelyn watched them prepare to leave. Something in her tightened, not fear, but a quiet refusal to let the night end unchanged. "Mr. Foster," she called. Daniel turned. "You said earlier that you didn't have another option tonight," she said. "Is that often the case?" Daniel answered honestly. "More often than I'd like." Evelyn nodded once. "There's a conference room near the east wing," she said. "Unused at night. Secure. If this happens again, that space will be available." Daniel did not answer immediately. "That's not an exception," Evelyn added. "It's a correction." Daniel met her eyes. "Then I accept." Evelyn inclined her head. "Good." Daniel took Lily's hand. They walked toward the exit, footsteps soft against polished floor. Evelyn remained where she was. She thought of all the rules she had enforced perfectly, and all the costs she had never written down. She opened her tablet at last, but not to sign documents. She drafted a note to legal, short, specific, quiet. A minor policy adjustment, it read. The servers hummed. The building breathed. And somewhere between policy and presence, a line had shifted. Until. The conference room in the East Wing had not been used in years. That was the first thing Evelyn Cross noticed when she unlocked it after midnight. The air inside was still, untouched by urgency. A long table sat beneath dimmed lights, its surface clean but faintly dulled, as if waiting patiently for a purpose that had never arrived. She left the door open. Across the hall, Daniel Foster finished securing his equipment. The night had taken its toll, not in exhaustion, but in a quieter way. His hands moved slower now, his shoulders heavier, as though the choices he had made were settling into him, testing their weight. At the security desk, Lily sat with her book balanced on her knees. The lighthouse stood tall on the page. Its beam cut a narrow path through painted darkness, steady and unblinking. Evelyn approached without sound. She stopped a few feet away, watching the child read, not skimming, reading. Each page turned with care, as though the story itself deserved respect. "What happens next?" Evelyn asked softly. Lily startled, then relaxed when she recognized the woman's voice. "The storm gets worse," she said, "but the light stays on." Evelyn nodded. "Does the lighthouse get scared?" Lily considered this seriously. "I don't think so," she said. "It knows it can't move, so it just keeps doing its job." The words struck Evelyn with unexpected force. She remembered another night, another building, a hospital corridor washed in fluorescent light. She had been younger then, still sharp, still ambitious, but not yet armored. Her son had sat beside her, legs swinging from a chair too big for him, reading the same book. She had told him the lighthouse was strong because it stayed. She had not stayed. Evelyn straightened. "May I sit?" she asked. Lily looked to her father, who had just returned. Daniel nodded. Evelyn took the chair beside Lily. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the data center filled the space between sentences, a sound that asked nothing and promised nothing. "You read a lot," Evelyn said at last. "When I wait," Lily replied. "Books make waiting feel shorter." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Waiting. She had spent years ensuring no one ever had to wait for her. Meetings began on time. Decisions arrived swiftly. Delays were failures. And yet, somehow, everything important in her life had slipped away while she hurried. Daniel cleared his throat. "Lily, it's time." Lily slipped a bookmark between the pages. She hugged the book once before placing it back in her backpack. Evelyn noticed how gently she did it, as if the book were not an object, but a companion. "Mr. Foster," Evelyn said, standing, "walk with me." Daniel hesitated, then followed her into the conference room. She did not sit at the head of the table. She stood by the window, looking out at the blank city beyond the glass. "You said earlier that you didn't want your daughter to learn that she was something to hide," Evelyn said. "That's right," Daniel replied. "Was that something you learned?" she asked. "Or something you decided?" Daniel took a moment. "I learned it too late," he said. "So, I decided to teach it early." Evelyn nodded slowly. "My son used to come to my office," she said, voice measured. "He'd sit quietly, just like Lily." Daniel did not interrupt. "I told myself it was temporary," Evelyn continued, "that once things stabilized, I'd have time again." She turned toward him. "Stability never arrives on its own." Daniel listened, silent. "I lost custody when he was 9, Evelyn said. "Not because I didn't love him, because I didn't stay." The words hung between them, bare and unguarded. Daniel did not offer comfort. He did not offer absolution. He simply said, "I'm sorry." Evelyn accepted this with a nod. "I don't need forgiveness," she said. "I need clarity." She glanced back toward the open door, where Lily stood beside Carl, waiting without complaint. "I've spent my career removing inefficiency," Evelyn said, "but tonight, I realized something." She met Daniel's eyes. "Care is not inefficient. It's just inconvenient." Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, not relief, alignment. Evelyn reached into her coat and pulled out her tablet. She opened a document, not a contract, not a report, a policy draft. "I'm amending night shift guidelines," she said. "Children of overnight staff may remain in designated secure areas when necessary, not as an exception, as a provision." Daniel stared at the screen. "This will change things," he said. "Yes," Evelyn replied. "It will." She closed the document without sending it. "Tomorrow," she added. "Not tonight." Daniel understood. Some decisions needed sleep. Lily stepped into the room then, holding her backpack with both hands. "Dad?" she asked. Daniel knelt. "Ready to go home?" Lily nodded. Then she looked at Evelyn. "You should keep the light on," she said, "even when it's hard." Evelyn swallowed. "I will," she said. Daniel took Lily's hand. They walked toward the exit together, unhurried. Evelyn remained behind. She picked up the book Lily had forgotten on the chair. The lighthouse stared back at her, unwavering. For the first time in years, Evelyn Cross did not feel late. Because morning came quietly. Not with sunlight, there were no windows in Daniel Foster's apartment that caught dawn directly, but with sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant rush of traffic, the soft breathing of a child asleep in the next room. Daniel sat at the small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. He had been awake for nearly an hour, staring at nothing in particular, replaying the night as if it were a problem that could be solved by repetition. Lily slept curled on her side, her backpack still resting against the bedroom wall. The lighthouse book lay open on her desk, face down. A habit she had picked up after Daniel once told her stories deserved rest too. Daniel rubbed his eyes. Staying had a cost. It always did. He checked his phone. No missed calls, no messages from work. That silence could mean many things, none of them certain. By the time Lily woke, Daniel was already dressed for another shift. Day work this time, repairing air conditioning units in buildings that rarely noticed the people who kept them livable. "Dad?" Lily called from the doorway, hair tangled, voice rough with sleep. "I'm here," he answered immediately. She padded over and climbed onto his lap, light as breath. "Are you tired?" she asked. Daniel considered lying. He didn't. "Yes," he said, "but I'm okay." She leaned her head against his chest. "You stayed." Daniel closed his eyes. "Yes," he said again, "I stayed." Across the city, Evelyn Cross stood alone in her office. The skyline stretched before her, sharp and distant. The IPO briefing lay open on her desk, pages neatly aligned. The numbers were strong, the projections confident. And yet, her attention kept drifting to the small policy document waiting on her screen. Night shift personnel accommodation addendum. She had not sent it yet. Not because she doubted the decision, because she understood its weight. Evelyn had built her authority on predictability, on the unspoken promise that the system would behave the same way every time. Introducing flexibility, human flexibility, meant inviting questions, and questions invited scrutiny. Her assistant knocked softly. "We're on schedule," the assistant said. "Legal is ready when you are." Evelyn nodded. "Send the addendum." The assistant paused. "Are you sure?" Evelyn's gaze did not waver. "Yes." The email left her outbox without ceremony. Somewhere below, a rule changed. Daniel's phone buzzed just before noon. He answered with a familiar knot in his stomach. "Daniel Foster," came the voice of the operations manager. Neutral, careful. "Yes." "Can you come by the data center after your shift? There's something we need to discuss." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Of course." When he arrived that evening, Lily came with him again, but this time, something was different. Carl greeted them with an easy smile. "You're cleared," he said. "Conference room's open." Daniel blinked. "Cleared?" Carl nodded toward a printed notice taped discreetly to the desk. Daniel read it once, then again. He felt his throat tighten, not in triumph, but in relief so quiet it almost felt like grief. Lily looked up at him. "What does it say?" He knelt. "It says, you're allowed to be here." Lily considered this. "I was already allowed," she said. Daniel smiled. "Yes, you were." They settled into the conference room. Lily spread her crayons across the table, drawing carefully. Daniel worked nearby, tools humming softly. Later, Evelyn passed the open doorway. She stopped. Inside, Lily was drawing a lighthouse. But this time, there were people inside it. A man, a child, both holding the light together. Evelyn did not enter. She walked on. That night, after Lily fell asleep in the chair, Daniel sat beside her, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. He thought of all the nights he had nearly chosen differently. Nights he could have left her with neighbors. Nights he could have taken risks that paid more, but cost more. Nights he could have taught her that survival meant shrinking. Staying had cost him promotions, convenience, silence. But it had given her something else, a reference point. Across the building, Evelyn stood alone in the server hall. The machines breathed steadily, obedient, reliable. She placed a hand against the glass. For years, she had believed staying was a weakness, that endurance was measured in hours worked, not hours shared. She was beginning to understand that she had measured the wrong thing. The system was stable. But something else, something less visible, had finally begun to shift. Therefore, the change did not arrive with a meeting. There was no all-hands email, no slide deck, no executive memo read aloud in a room full of nodding heads. The system simply adjusted, quietly, the way systems preferred to do when they were forced to acknowledge the human cost of their own efficiency. Daniel noticed it first in small ways. The next night shift, a temporary sign appeared near the security desk. Designated safe area, authorized access. No explanation, no apology, just language precise enough to become permanent. Carl noticed it too. "Didn't think I'd see that in my lifetime," he muttered, taping the edge so it lay flat. "Usually rules only tighten." Daniel said nothing. He had learned not to celebrate too early. Lily, however, saw it immediately. "That's for me," she said, pointing. Daniel crouched beside her. "It's for kids like you." Lily smiled, satisfied with the distinction. They entered the conference room together. Lily took her usual place at the table, arranging crayons with ceremonial care. Daniel set up his tools nearby, mindful of the soft boundary the room now represented. Not a favor, not an indulgence, but space carved out of a system that had never asked who needed it. As the night deepened, others noticed. A janitor paused at the doorway, eyes flicking to Lily. "Didn't know kids were allowed now?" Daniel met his gaze. "They are." The man nodded slowly, as if committing the information to memory. "Good," he said. "About time." Word spread without permission, not as gossip, but as orientation, as knowledge passed hand to hand between people who lived inside the margins of policy. On the executive floor, Evelyn Cross sat through her final IPO briefing with a familiar stillness. "Any outstanding risks?" the lead analyst asked. Evelyn scanned the report. "No," she said. That was true, but it was also incomplete. When the meeting ended, she remained seated while others filtered out, voices low, shoes soft against carpet. Her assistant lingered. "You'll be expected at the launch dinner," the assistant said. "Press will be there." Evelyn nodded. "I know." "And the policy update?" the assistant asked carefully. "Legal flagged it. Some board members have questions." Evelyn closed the folder in front of her. "Let them," she said. That night, Daniel received an email. No subject line, just a single sentence from HR. "Please confirm acknowledgement of the updated night shift accommodation policy." Daniel read it twice, then closed his phone. Lily was drawing again. This time she drew the building, tall, square, with a small light glowing in one corner. "What's that?" Daniel asked. "That's where we sit," Lily said. "So people can see us." Daniel swallowed. Across the city, Evelyn stood in her apartment kitchen, staring at her own reflection in the window. She had canceled the dinner. Instead, she poured a glass of water and sat at the table alone. Her phone buzzed, a message from her son. "I saw the press release. Congrats." She stared at the words for a long time. Then she typed, "Thank you. I hope you're well." She did not send it. Some conversations needed more than timing. At the data center, the night passed without incident. Daniel finished his work early and sat beside Lily, listening to the hum of machines. He realized, suddenly, that he was not waiting for something to go wrong. That alone felt strange. A woman he didn't recognize approached hesitantly. She wore a badge from a different department, her voice low. "I heard," she said, "about the room." Daniel nodded. "My sister works nights," the woman continued. "Single mom. She quit last year because she couldn't find childcare." Daniel felt a familiar ache. "She might come back," the woman said, "if this stays." Daniel chose his words carefully. "It will." The woman smiled, relief softening her face. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" Daniel asked. "For staying," she replied. On the morning of the IPO, Evelyn stood backstage while applause thundered beyond the curtain. The numbers would make headlines. The valuation would be celebrated. Analysts would praise the system she had perfected. But her mind drifted to a conference room with dim lights, to a child who read quietly, to a man who had not asked for permission to keep his dignity intact. She stepped onto the stage, spoke clearly, precisely. And when the applause faded, she felt something unexpected, not triumph, but alignment. Later, alone again, Evelyn opened her tablet and reviewed internal feedback. One note stood out, buried among logistics and metrics. "Thank you for seeing us. No name attached." Evelyn closed the file. She understood now that systems did not announce when they became humane. They only revealed it in who stayed. Meanwhile, the building was louder after the IPO, not in sound. Machines still hummed at their measured pace, but in attention. Cameras lingered longer at the entrance. Executives walked with quicker steps. Names that had once passed unnoticed now arrived wrapped in recognition. Daniel Foster felt it the first night back. Nothing had changed in his schedule. Same badge, same locker, same tools. Yet people looked at him differently, not with admiration, but with awareness, as if his presence now carried context. Lily noticed it too. "Why are people smiling at us?" she asked, her legs swinging beneath the conference table. Daniel adjusted a cable tie. "Sometimes people smile when they understand something late." Lily nodded, accepting this without question. She drew again, careful lines forming a bridge this time. On one side stood a small building, on the other, a tall one. Between them, lights dotted the path. At the entrance desk, Carl leaned back in his chair, hands folded behind his head. "Never thought I'd see press vans out front," he said. "All that noise for numbers." Daniel glanced toward the glass doors, where a reporter adjusted a microphone. "Numbers make people feel safe," he said. Carl snorted. "So does knowing where your kid is." Daniel smiled faintly. That night passed without incident, but the following week did not. An email arrived from facilities operations, a request to review utilization of non-standard spaces. The language was neutral, the implication was not. Daniel read it once, then closed his phone. He did not tell Lily. Evelyn Cross stood at the edge of a long table, reviewing post-IPO logistics. The boardroom was full, the mood efficient and satisfied. "Minor concern," one board member said, tapping a screen. "There's been some informal use of facilities. We need to ensure consistency." Evelyn did not look up. "Which facilities?" "A conference room in the East Wing, after hours." Evelyn met his gaze. And the concern? Precedent, he replied. If exceptions spread— It isn't an exception, Evelyn said calmly. It's a provision. Silence followed. Another board member cleared her throat. We're receiving positive internal feedback, she said. Retention metrics for overnight staff are improving. Evelyn nodded once. Then the provision is working. The conversation moved on. Evelyn marked the moment carefully. Resistance had not disappeared, but it had learned to speak softly. Back at the data center, Daniel finished early and sat beside Lily, who had fallen asleep with her head on the table, crayons still scattered around her hand. He draped his jacket over her shoulders and watched her breathe. The quiet after applause was always the hardest part. It was where momentum either settled into habit or dissolved. A knock sounded softly at the open door. It was the operations manager. Daniel, he said, voice low. Got a minute? Daniel stepped outside, closing the door halfway. There's some discussion, the manager began. About the room. Daniel waited. Some people think it blurs lines, the manager said. Creates expectations. Daniel nodded. It does. The manager frowned. You're not worried? Daniel shook his head. I was worried before, when there was nowhere to sit. The manager studied him for a moment, then sighed. Just be careful. Daniel returned to Lily. Careful was something he had learned early. At home that night, Lily asked a question Daniel had been dreading. Dad, she said, brushing her teeth, are we going to stop coming to work together? Daniel leaned against the doorframe. Why would we? He asked. Because things change when people look, she said. Daniel felt the truth of it land quietly. Some things change, he said. Some things stay. Lily rinsed and wiped her mouth. I like staying, she said. Daniel nodded. Me too. 2 nights later, Evelyn Cross returned to the data center without notice. No security detail this time, no assistant. She walked the halls alone, listening. At the east wing, she paused. The conference room door was open. Inside, Lily sat drawing. Daniel worked nearby. Evelyn watched from the doorway, unseen. Lily was explaining her drawing to Daniel. This is the light, she said, pointing. It shows where to walk. Daniel listened, fully. Evelyn felt a familiar ache, this time without regret attached. Just clarity. She stepped inside. Good evening, she said. Daniel turned, surprised. Miss Cross. Lily looked up. Hi, she said, cheerful. Evelyn smiled, a small one, unused. I wanted to see, Evelyn said, if the provision was being used responsibly. Daniel gestured to the room. You can judge. Evelyn looked around, orderly, quiet, safe. I've received questions, she said, about whether this should continue. Daniel met her eyes. And what did you say? I said systems are judged by who they protect when no one is watching, Evelyn replied. Lily beamed. Evelyn crouched slightly. What are you drawing tonight? Lily held up the paper. People waiting, but not alone, Evelyn nodded. That's important, she stood. It will continue, she said to Daniel, not because it's popular, because it's right. Daniel felt the weight lift, not from his shoulders, but from something deeper. Evelyn turned to leave, then paused. Thank you, she said. Not formally, not carefully, just plainly. Daniel inclined his head. Evelyn walked away. The building returned to its hum. The applause had faded. What remained was quieter and stronger. Afterward, the first thing Daniel noticed was the absence of urgency. It was subtle, almost suspicious. No alarms, no last-minute calls, no hurried footsteps echoing through the corridors. The data center settled into its late-night rhythm as if it had finally decided to trust itself. Daniel checked the logs twice. Everything was stable. He leaned back in his chair beside the conference table, watching Lily color. She had moved on from bridges and buildings. Tonight, she was drawing a circle, wide, deliberate, and filling it with smaller figures. What's that? Daniel asked. Our circle, Lily said without looking up. It's where people fit. Daniel smiled. Everyone fits? Lily thought for a moment. Everyone who stays. The words stayed with him. In the weeks following the IPO, the story did not spread the way stories usually did. There were no headlines about policy changes, no interviews about corporate compassion. The provision existed quietly, folded into the structure of the company like a beam added to a house, unseen but load-bearing. And because it was quiet, people trusted it. A technician brought his toddler once, just for an hour. A single mother from logistics asked about night shifts again. HR began receiving fewer resignation letters marked childcare conflict. The system adapted, not dramatically, but honestly. Daniel felt the difference most when he stopped bracing himself. He still worked hard, still arrived early, still kept his head down. But the knot that had lived permanently beneath his ribs loosened. Not because life was easier, but because it was less fragile. One night, as Lily slept in the chair, her head resting on her folded arms, Daniel caught his reflection in the glass. For the first time in years, he did not look like someone waiting to be corrected. Evelyn Cross watched the internal metrics shift, retention up, sick days down, overnight coverage stabilizing. The data made sense. Human systems always worked better when people were allowed to be whole. Still, she knew what had not yet been accounted for: the cost. It arrived in the form of a letter from the board, carefully worded, politely concerned. "We support adaptive leadership," it read. "However, precedent invites scrutiny. We recommend a review period." Evelyn read the letter once, then again. She folded it neatly and placed it in her drawer. That night, she did not go home. She drove instead, without a driver, without security, to the data center. The parking lot was nearly empty. Inside, the lights were low, the atmosphere calm. She found Daniel in the East Wing, reviewing a maintenance checklist. Lily was awake, humming softly as she organized her crayons by color. Evelyn stood at the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "May I come in?" she asked. Daniel looked up. "Of course." Evelyn entered and closed the door behind her. "I received a letter today," she said, "from the board." Daniel waited. "They want a review," Evelyn continued. "A timeline, conditions, an exit strategy." Lily looked up. "Exit from where?" Evelyn crouched so she was level with her. "From rules that let children stay." Lily frowned. "Why?" Evelyn paused, then answered honestly. "Because sometimes people are afraid of things that don't hurt them." Lily considered this. "Then they don't have to come," she said. Daniel felt a quiet ache in his chest. Evelyn stood. "I haven't replied yet," she said. "I wanted to see this again." She gestured to the room. The child, the man, the order that existed without enforcement. "This doesn't look like a problem," she said. Daniel shook his head. "It's not." Evelyn exhaled. "It is, however, a choice." Daniel met her gaze. So was staying. They stood in silence. Evelyn reached into her coat and removed the folded letter. She placed it on the table. "I'm not going to end it," she said, "but I need to be certain." "Of what?" Daniel asked. "That what we've built here doesn't depend on me," Evelyn replied. "That it survives scrutiny." Daniel looked around the room, at the conference table worn smooth by quiet use, at Lily's drawings taped neatly to one wall, at the calm that had become routine. "It already does," he said. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll formalize it." Daniel felt the weight of the word formalize, its permanence, its exposure. Lily yawned. "Is it bedtime?" she asked. Daniel smiled. "Almost." Evelyn watched him tuck the jacket more securely around Lily's shoulders. "I won't be here tomorrow night," Evelyn said suddenly. Daniel looked up. "I need to speak to the board," she continued. "I need to own this." Daniel inclined his head. "Thank you." Evelyn shook her head. "No," she said. "Thank you for not making it about gratitude." She turned to leave, then stopped. "If they push back," she added, "it may get uncomfortable." Daniel nodded. It already was. Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. She left the room quietly. The next morning, Daniel walked Lily to school. She skipped along the sidewalk, backpack bouncing. "Dad," she said, "if people don't take things away, does that mean they stay forever?" Daniel thought about this. "Not forever," he said, "but long enough to matter." Lily smiled, satisfied. At work, Daniel found a printed memo waiting at the security desk. Official letterhead, clear language, night shift family accommodation policy. Approved. No expiration date. Carl whistled low. "Looks like you're a part of the building now." Daniel folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his pocket. That night, when he returned to the conference room, Lily was already asleep. He sat beside her, listening to the hum of machines. Nothing had been taken away. And that, he realized, was the most radical outcome of all. Finally. The night the policy became permanent, nothing happened. There were no announcements, no applause, no messages lighting up Daniel Foster's phone. The data center did not change its rhythm to mark the occasion. The servers breathed as they always had. The lights stayed the same. The guards followed the same routes. That was how Daniel knew it was real. He arrived just before dusk with Lily, her hand tucked into his jacket pocket out of habit more than cold. The conference room door was already open. Inside, the table was clear. The chair Lily liked sat where it always had. She climbed up without being told. "Is this still okay?" she asked, a question that belonged more to memory than to the present. Daniel set his bag down. "It is." She nodded, satisfied, not excited. Excitement faded. Stability stayed. Daniel checked the posted notice near the security desk. The wording was precise, deliberate, finished. Approved policy. Effective immediately. No end date. No qualifiers. Carl caught Daniel's eye and raised an eyebrow. "Looks official." Daniel smiled. "It is." Carl leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said, "I've worked here a long time. Most changes come with speeches." "Some don't need them," Daniel replied. Evelyn Cross watched the city from her office window as the evening darkened. The board meeting had ended an hour earlier. It had not been easy. Questions had been sharp. Concerns measured. Words like liability and precedent had moved across the table like chess pieces. She had answered all of them, not defensively, not emotionally. She had spoken in the language the board respected. Metrics, retention, resilience. She had shown them the data that proved what care could do when allowed to exist. But she had ended with something else. "This policy isn't generous," she had said. "It's accurate. It reflects how work actually happens." There had been silence, then agreement. Now, alone again, Evelyn removed her jacket and sat at her desk. She opened a drawer she rarely used and took out a small object, a photograph, worn at the edges. Her son at 8 years old, standing beside a bookshelf, a lighthouse book tucked under his arm. She traced the outline of his face with her thumb. For the first time in years, the memory did not accuse her. It simply waited. At the data center, the night unfolded gently. Daniel worked through his checklist, efficient, unhurried. Lily drew quietly, then fell asleep with her head against the back of the chair. He covered her with his jacket and returned to his work. Hours passed without interruption. Sometime near midnight, Evelyn arrived. No escort, no announcement. Daniel noticed her reflection in the glass before he heard her footsteps. "Ms. Cross," he said, setting down his tools. "Daniel," she replied. "I won't stay long." She stepped into the room and looked around. The drawings on the wall, the worn chair, the quiet order. "It's done," she said, formally. Daniel nodded. "Thank you." Evelyn shook her head. "You didn't ask for it." "No," Daniel agreed. They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the building steady between them. "I used to think leadership meant never being needed," Evelyn said, "that if the system worked, people wouldn't notice me." Daniel listened. "Now," she continued, "I think leadership means building something that works even when you leave." Daniel glanced at Lily, asleep, safe. "You did," he said. Evelyn allowed herself a small breath. "I hope so." She turned toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing," she said. "Your daughter, she changed more than a policy." Daniel smiled faintly. "She just waited." Evelyn nodded. "Sometimes that's enough." She left quietly. Near dawn, Daniel packed up his tools and gently woke Lily. "Time to go," he whispered. She rubbed her eyes. "Did I miss anything?" Daniel thought about the night, about the weeks that led to it, about the years before. "No," he said. "You were right where you needed to be." They walked out together, the building still humming behind them. Outside, the sky was pale with early light. Lily slipped her hand into his. "Dad," she said, "are we going to keep coming here?" Daniel considered the question. "Not forever," he said, "but long enough." She nodded, content. Months later, the policy was unremarkable. It existed in handbooks and onboarding sessions. New employees read it without surprise. Some used it, many didn't. But everyone knew it was there. And because it was there, people stayed. Daniel continued his work. Lily grew older. The conference room gained new scratches on its table, new drawings on its wall. Evelyn visited less often, but when she did, she always paused at the east wing. One evening, she found the room empty. The chair was pushed in, the drawings removed, the table clean. For a moment, she felt the old ache. Then she noticed the sign still posted by the desk. Designated safe area. She smiled. The space did not need to be occupied to matter. Some things, once made possible, did not need to be proven again. They only needed to remain. And in that quiet continuity, in the absence of drama, reward, or loss, Daniel Foster had found something rarer than security. He had found enough.